Chapter 15. 15.1 Relationship with the Jews. At first the Messenger ﷺ was well received by the Jews of Medina. They saw how powerful his followers were and thought they could eventually use them to fight in their wars against the Christian tribes of Najran. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, benevolent and trusting, met their show of friendliness most cordially and made treaties with them, mentioned earlier, that gave them freedom and security. He used to sit with their elders discussing religion, teaching and explaining, just as he did with his own followers. As the Jews were not sincere in their attempts at understanding, instead of being delighted, they began to fear the Prophet ﷺ. This new religion was so clear and logical that they feared the reaction of their own people. They had, however, given them permission to attend the messenger's sessions, and they could not abruptly withdraw it. One day there occurred a momentous and significant event that brought the Jews' resentment out into the open and showed what their true feelings were. Their most learned scholar and devout rabbi went to discuss religion with the messenger. This rabbi had found in the ancient books of the Jews that the last and greatest of the prophets was yet to appear and that he was clearly described. The rabbi applied the description to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and finding that it fitted him so well, he had become more and more convinced that Muhammad ﷺ was indeed this last and greatest prophet. This rabbi, who was renamed Abdullah ibn Salam by the Prophet ﷺ, professed his belief and made one request. He asked the messenger to hear the opinion of his people about him before he announced to them his entry into Islam. Accordingly, the messenger called them and asked what they thought of their rabbi. Not understanding the reason for the question, they replied, "He is our most learned scholar, our master and the son of our master and our greatest man." Whereupon Abdullah ibn Salam appeared and announced his entry into Islam, inviting them to do the same, but they rejected him and the truth he had embraced. They rapidly changed their tune and began to revile him among their people in an attempt to prevent any of them following him. When the Jews realized that they were not going to be able to make the Prophet ﷺ and his followers fight their wars for them, and that they were not going to be able to regain dominance in Medina, they began to wage a devious war upon the Prophet ﷺ, which makes the slanders against him seem crude. It was a war of cunning insinuations and subtle arguments, and because of their knowledge of previous revelations, they were experts at this. Their aim was to make people doubt and to waste the messenger's time and energy upon questions whose answers they already knew, and which could be found in their own books. They sat with the Muslims pretending to believe, and then asked questions that served only to deprive others of the messenger's teaching. Such questions were, if Allah created everything, then who created Allah? Thereupon the holy verses were sent down to say, Allah is one, Allah the everlasting. He has not given birth. He was not born. He has absolutely no peer. Surah 112, verses 1-4. The Jews were well aware that Allah is one. Most of the precepts of Islam were not new to them, for in principle the precepts of Allah are unchangeable, eternal, and the same for all peoples. The Quran differs from the Torah and the Bible only in the parts of the previous revelations that have been altered by man. Their aim was to quibble and cast doubts in the heart of those who believed. 15.2 Jewish Plots. They began to ask questions about things that had happened centuries earlier, which had for them a symbolic value and that only a prophet would know about. Some of the holy verses sent down in the Quran were in answer to these questions. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was able to answer these questions correctly, as he was truly a prophet, supported by the invincible power of Allah. As the only way to destroy him was to make him err in the sight of Allah, they devised a wicked plan to this end. Some of their elders and rabbis went to him and said, "You know our position among our people. If we follow you, they would all follow you." Then they explained that they differed with their people on a certain issue. If the Prophet ﷺ would accept to be arbiter between them and their people, then take their side, they would follow him and all their people would follow him. He would thus be saving many human souls. This they knew to be the messenger's dearest wish. In spite of his wish to save them, the messenger refrained from their suggestion, for Islam decrees that a Muslim shall judge fairly, even if it is against himself or his own parents. He used to say, "It is my fate to see people try to rush into the fire, and my duty to try and pick them out." On one such occasion the holy verses tell him to be on his guard against them, saying, "And decide between them according to what Allah has shown you, and do not follow their wishes. If they turn away, then know that Allah desires to strike them for some of their sins. Of men, many are trespassers." Surah 5, verse 49. At the same time, the Jews tried stirring up the old feuds between Al-Aws and Al-Khazraj, as this had always been a successful way of dominating them both in the past. Now, however, Al-Aws and Al-Khazraj had become brothers in Islam, and were often to be seen discussing religion and earnestly studying the Quran together. One day, a Jew, Sha'as ibn Qais, passed by some of the Al-Aws and Al-Khazraj conversing amiably together. He was annoyed by the sight, so he called a Jewish youth who had been standing with them and told him to find an opportunity to mention a certain battle from the past. He did so, and they began to differ, boasting of their respected warriors until it became a full-blown dispute. When news reached the messenger of what was happening, he went to them and reminded them of the lofty aims of Islam and of their bond of brotherhood. Brought to their senses, both stunned at their own stupidity and overjoyed with the reaffirmation of their faith, they wept and embraced each other. On another occasion, some of the Jews who pretended to listen to the messenger's teaching were caught whispering and conspiring in a corner of the mosque, and the Prophet ﷺ had to order that they be sent out. The Jews did not know what to do about the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Realizing that they would never be able to dominate the inhabitants of Medina so long as he was there, they went to him and said that all the great prophets had been to Jerusalem. Since he was a prophet, it was only proper that he should go there as well, and consider his stay in Medina only as an interval between Mecca and Jerusalem. It did not take the messenger long to realize what their real aim was. Then a momentous revelation came to him from Allah which left him in no doubt about the matter. 15.3 The New Orientation. Until that date, 17 months after the Hijrah to Medina, the Muslims had made their orientation in the prayer the same as that of the Jews. The Prophet ﷺ had felt increasingly uneasy about this and had longed for a direction to face that was characteristic of the pure, unspoiled faith that was his in common with his forefathers Ibrahim and Ismail alayhimus. Where could a faith so very old, yet reborn and revived, turn? The Prophet ﷺ had turned towards Allah for guidance, and the command had come. We see your face scanning the sky. We shall give you an orientation you approve. Turn your face towards the sacred mosque. Wherever you are, turn your faces towards it. Those given the book know it is the truth from their Lord. Allah is not unaware of what they do. Surah 2, verse 144. The Muslims were overjoyed because the implications of the new orientation were very great, the hopes it revived even greater. Mecca was the messenger's homeland, and in Mecca had been built the first sanctuary for the worship of Allah. The emigrants were homesick for this place that had spiritual connections stronger than anywhere else in the world, but they would not admit it even to themselves. Allah, who knows the secret of every heart, would give them back what they had sacrificed for the sake of their religion. He would give them back the sacred house, cherished and sought out by pilgrims throughout the centuries. If their orientation was to be the house of Allah, then surely one day Allah would let his messenger return to it. If they were given permission to pray towards it, then surely one day they would be allowed to go there as pilgrims and circle the Kaaba as their ancestors Ibrahim and Ismail alayhimus had done. It was a day of hope and rejoicing for the Muslims, a day of connecting the very new with its ancient roots. 15.4 Jewish Reaction. While it was a day of hope and joy for the Muslims, it was a day of mourning and mortification for the Jews. Mortification because the different orientation implied that the Muslims had become completely independent of them, and mourning because their old books said that the last of the great prophets would change the orientation of the religion of Allah from Jerusalem to the ancient house of Ibrahim a.s. Their knowledge of this prophecy is what the holy verses in the previous section refer to. So long as the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ had not done so, they could deny his prophethood and feel justified in not being committed to follow him. But once the prophecy had been verified at his hands, they could no longer deny that he was the very prophet they had waited centuries for and had been ordered to obey. Their arrogance as the chosen people stood in the way of their following an Arab. Their desire for power prevented them from admitting that this prophecy had come about, in case it led the common people to follow him. They had to find a means of stopping it happening, thus proving that he was not the prophet they had waited for. Their elders went in a body to the messenger and said that if he would change his orientation back to Jerusalem, then they would follow him. Once again the revelation guided the messenger. If you bring the people of the book every token, they will not follow your orientation, nor will you follow theirs. You will not follow each other's orientation. Should you follow their wishes after the knowledge that has come to you, you would be of the wicked. Surah 2, verse 145. The Muslims began to have a distinctive character, while the Jews began to grow closer to the hypocrites and the polytheists. 15.5 The Meeting of the Three Religions. At the time when religious discussion and arguments had reached a peak between the messenger and the Jews, a delegation of 60 horsemen came from Najran. They were Christian priests and nobles who had come to join in the discussions, and among them were priests honoured and revered by the Roman Emperor. The three revealed religions at last met in one place. The Jews denied the prophets who came after them and denied that Jesus was the Son of God, as the Christians maintained, claiming that Uzziah, Ezra, was the Son of God. The messenger pointed out that the decrees of Allah were eternal and unalterable. What was communicated to him was the same as had been communicated to all the prophets before him: Nuh a.s., Ibrahim a.s., Ayyub a.s., Musa a.s., and Isa a.s., son of Maryam. It is that Allah is one, He has no son and no mate, and He is the creator of the whole universe. The difference found between the Christians and the Jews was due to human invention. The Messenger ﷺ challenged them to bring the Torah and to recite it, for in it is written that Allah is one. When he saw that they would not admit the truth of his words, even though they realized that he spoke the truth, he asked them to do what the holy verses had bid him ask them. To those who argue with you about him, Jesus, after the knowledge that has come to you, say, Come, let us call our children and your children, our women and your women, ourselves and yourselves. Then call upon Allah to let his curse fall upon the liars. Surah 3 verse 61. The Christians of Najran were aware that he spoke the truth, and so they refused to pray with him for the curse of Allah to fall upon those who had not told the truth. They saw how upright and fair he was in dealing with them, and they asked him to send back with them one of his companions to be the arbiter between them and their people in certain matters on which they differed. The messenger chose Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah to go with them, a man of profound faith and upright judgment, whom the messenger used to call the trustee of this nation. Although they were convinced of the truth of the messenger's words, the Christians of Najran would not announce their belief in him. When they were asked why they did not, Abu Harith, one of the most learned among them, summed up the situation in the following words. What prevents me is what these people, the Romans, have done to us. They have honoured us, made us rich, and given us influence. If I were to disagree with them, all this would be taken away.